So, let's talk about stories. Not just the kind you read in a book, but the really, really big ones. The ones that try to explain everything. Philosophers call these grand narratives or meta-narratives. Think of them as the ultimate instruction manuals for humanity. They tell us where we came from, where we're going, and how we should live our lives. These are the stories that provide a universal framework for understanding history, knowledge, and the human experience. They promise that if we just follow the plot, everything will eventually make sense. It's a comforting thought, right? That there's one single, coherent story that unites us all and points toward a final, triumphant conclusion. These grand narratives are everywhere, and they often operate so quietly in the background that we don't even notice them. For instance, the idea of progress is a huge one. This is the story that humanity is constantly moving forward, becoming more enlightened, more technologically advanced, and morally better over time. Science itself can be seen as a grand narrative, the story of how rational inquiry and the scientific method will eventually uncover all the objective truths of the universe, leading to a complete understanding of reality. Another powerful example is religion, which often presents a comprehensive story about creation, purpose, and salvation that applies to everyone, everywhere. These aren't just small tales, they are all-encompassing belief systems. These stories are powerful because they offer meaning and stability. They give us a sense of collective purpose. Whether it's the political narrative of Marxism, which sees history as a class struggle inevitably leading to a communist utopia, or the capitalist narrative of endless growth and individual opportunity, these stories shape our societies. They build our institutions, our laws, and our shared values. They are the intellectual scaffolding upon which civilizations have been built for centuries. They tell us who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, and what we should all be striving for. They are, in a very real sense, the operating system for entire cultures. But then, along came a way of thinking that looked at these big, all-encompassing stories and said, wait a minute, this was postmodernism. It didn't just disagree with one or two of the big stories. It became skeptical of the very idea of a single universal story. Postmodern thinkers started to question whether any one narrative could truly explain the messy, complicated, and diverse reality of human existence. They suggested that maybe, just maybe, these grand narratives weren't universal truths at all. Instead, they might be constructions, created by specific people in specific places for specific reasons. And that simple act of questioning changed everything. So, why did people suddenly start doubting these stories that had provided comfort and direction for so long? Well, the 20th century happened, and it was brutal. The grand narrative of human progress and reason took a massive hit during the two world wars. People looked at the unprecedented destruction, the Holocaust, and the atomic bomb and thought, is this what progress looks like? Is this the enlightened future we were promised? The optimistic story that humanity was steadily marching towards a better world seemed not just naive, but dangerously false. The horrors of the century made it incredibly difficult to believe in a single benevolent arc of history. The promises of the Enlightenment seemed to ring hollow in the face of such large-scale industrialized violence. At the same time, the world was becoming more connected. The voices that had been silenced or ignored for centuries began to be heard. The grand narratives of Western civilization were largely written by, well, powerful white European men. But what about the experiences of women, or people of color, or those from colonized nations? Their stories often didn't fit into the neat, tidy plot of Western progress. In fact, for many, that story of progress was actually a story of oppression, exploitation, and erasure. The rise of post-colonialism, feminism, and the civil rights movement introduced a flood of new perspectives that fractured the old singular worldview. This explosion of different voices and experiences made it impossible to maintain the illusion of one universal truth. Whose truth were we talking about anyway? The truth of the colonizer or the colonized? The man or the woman, the factory owner or the worker? Postmodernism embraced this multiplicity. It argued that instead of one grand narrative, there are countless small narratives or local narratives. Each of these stories is valid within its own context, reflecting the lived experiences of a particular community or individual. Suddenly, history wasn't a single straight line, but a messy, tangled web of competing stories, each with its own claim to legitimacy. The very idea of objective truth came under fire. Postmodern thinkers pointed out that the people who get to write the history books are usually the winners of wars and the holders of power. The truth presented in these official accounts often serves the interests of those in charge. This led to a profound skepticism about any claim to absolute objective knowledge. It wasn't about denying reality, but about questioning who gets to define it. This shift was monumental. It moved the focus from finding the one true story to understanding how different stories are created, who they serve, and what they leave out. The era of universal certainty was fading. To navigate this new world without a central story, postmodernism developed a set of tools. The first and most important is a healthy dose of skepticism. This is what the philosopher Jean-François Lyotard famously called an incredulity towards meta-narratives. It means approaching any big, all-encompassing claim with suspicion. When someone tells you they have a system that explains everything, whether it's in politics, religion, or science, the postmodern response is to ask critical questions. Who is telling this story? Whose interests does it serve? What assumptions is it based on? And what other possible stories is it silencing? This isn't about being cynical for the sake of it, but about being a critical and responsible thinker. The second tool is an embrace of plurality and diversity. If there is no single grand narrative, then there must be many different narratives, all coexisting. Postmodernism celebrates this. It finds value in the margins, in the voices that have been excluded from the mainstream conversation. This is why it has been so influential in fields like post-colonial literature and cultural studies. It encourages us to listen to a multitude of perspectives, recognizing that each one offers a unique and valuable piece of the human puzzle. This is a radical departure from the idea that we must all conform to a single, dominant culture or worldview. It suggests that a richer understanding of the world comes from variety, not uniformity. A third key concept is deconstruction, an idea most associated with the philosopher Jacques Derrida. This sounds complicated, but the basic idea is about taking texts apart to see how they work. Deconstruction involves looking closely at the language and hidden assumptions within a story or a philosophical argument. It reveals the internal contradictions and the ways in which a text might be saying something different from what it appears to say on the surface. For example, deconstructing a historical document might reveal how its objective language actually promotes a very specific political agenda. It's like being a detective for hidden meanings and power structures embedded in language itself. Finally, and perhaps most crucially, postmodernism shines a bright light on the relationship between power and knowledge. Drawing on the work of thinkers like Michel Foucault, it argues that what we consider truth or knowledge is often determined by institutions of power. Think about it. Governments, universities, and corporations all play a role in defining what counts as legitimate knowledge. The way we talk about medicine, law, or even sanity is shaped by power structures. Postmodernism asks us to be constantly aware of this connection. It reminds us that knowledge is never neutral. It is always entangled with power, and challenging dominant narratives is a way of challenging that power. The impact of this shift away from grand narratives has been enormous, rippling through almost every aspect of modern life. In philosophy and history, it led to a rejection of sweeping, all-encompassing theories. Historians began to focus more on micro-histories, the stories of ordinary people and marginalized communities, rather than just the sagas of kings and empires. The arts and literature exploded with new forms that played with this idea. Postmodern novels often feature unreliable narrators, fragmented timelines, and a self-conscious awareness that they are, in fact, just stories. Artists began to mix styles from different eras, a practice known as pastiche, to show that no single style is superior or more authentic than another. Of course, this way of thinking is not without its critics. Some argue that by dismantling every grand narrative, postmodernism leaves us with nothing to believe in. If all truths are relative and all stories are equally valid, how can we make moral judgments or build a just society? This is the charge of relativism, that postmodernism can lead to a kind of anything-goes paralysis where we can't agree on basic facts or shared values. Critics worry that it can be used to justify cynicism or to deny objective realities like climate change or historical atrocities. They argue that while it's good to be skeptical, a total rejection of shared truth can be disorienting and even dangerous. Despite these criticisms, the legacy of questioning grand narratives remains incredibly important. It has equipped us with the critical tools to challenge authority and to be wary of those who claim to have all the answers. By dismantling the idea that there is only one right way to see the world, it has opened up space for a more inclusive and democratic conversation. we are now more aware of how stories are constructed and whose voices have been historically left out. This awareness is essential for building a more equitable society, one that doesn't impose a single monolithic culture on everyone. The world is a complex, multifaceted place, and our stories should reflect that. In the end, living after the end of grand narratives doesn't mean we live without meaning or purpose. It simply means that we have to create that meaning for ourselves in our communities through the smaller, more personal stories we choose to live by. It invites us to be more humble about our own beliefs and more curious about the beliefs of others. Questioning the big stories isn't about destroying truth. It's about making the search for it more honest, more inclusive, and more attuned to the incredible diversity of human experience. It's a reminder that the map is not the territory, and no single story can ever capture the richness of the world itself.